Hi, and welcome to a brand new edition of OnSide with myself, Kaylin Kyle, and Andres Cordero. Last week, we broke down highlights from Week 1 and Week 2, and I also asked Dre who had caught his eye from the first two games of the season. It was none other than draftee Robbie Robinson. So it was only right that we have Robinson as our first ever player on the show. We also have another very special guest on the show today, but first, welcome Dre. How are you?
I'm great, Kaylin. We did it. We did episode 1, and we're still on the air.
Yes.
So we're back for episode 2. I'm actually really excited about today because, as you said, we're going to do a deep dive into Robbie Robinson, the #1 pick in the MLS drafts, MLS Super Draft, I should say. And our other guest, who I'll let you introduce, is actually the person to talk to when it comes to Inter Miami sporting projects. So I've got questions just as a fan that I want to know about. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, let's get to our first guest. He needs very little introduction. A successful agent turned into a successful GM, and now the COO and sporting director for Inter Miami. Welcome, Paul McDonough. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Really good. I'm enjoying the Miami weather at the moment. It's not a bad place to quarantine, but it's honestly a pleasure to have you. I mean, we have so many questions to ask you because you were successful in Orlando, you were successful in Atlanta, and I was there firsthand. I mean, I was a player for the Orlando Pride when you took over for Orlando City, and then you moved to Atlanta United and made that a huge success. And now obviously you're here with Inter Miami, and I want to ask you, was there something particular here that you wanted to bring and make it a priority to make Inter Miami a huge success?
I thought it was an enormous challenge. I think there's a massive amount of potential with the ownership group and with the city, with David, and David's commitment to the club. I think all those things and the experiences I've had in my career, from being a coach to an agent to 2 other expansion teams, I thought, I could help, build this club into something special.
Paul, that's really interesting that you said that you saw it as an enormous challenge, because I think even coming into it as a challenge, you couldn't have foreseen sort of the obstacles and hurdles that have been thrown in the way of this franchise so far in the early going. But you also mentioned you started your sort of football life as an agent. And I'm curious, having already had success, building squads elsewhere, what did you take from that previous life as an agent into that role as a sporting director, as someone who is creating squads?
Yeah, I think my basis of education really came from my time being in college. When I was a college coach and I worked at some of the top universities, my responsibility was to build teams. And when I went into an agent, it was still recruiting, but it wasn't the same team and club building that I really liked. So when I had the opportunity to leave being an agent, I really wanted to get back into building clubs and teams, because that's what I enjoy.
And I think for me, as a player, obviously I want to pick your brain about this. A former player, I should say. I'm 4 years retired. But what is something that you look for personality-wise in a player in order to bring them in to a squad to make it a success?
Yeah, I think there's so many different things with players, right? I mean, character is an enormous part. Love of the game, believing in the project. I think it's really, really important, especially in expansion. When you go get players, they have to believe in the challenges ahead of them. Mm-hmm. And I think when you find players that believe in the challenge that they're about to undertake and the difficulties, those guys seem to be really good core pieces that you can build around.
Paul, let's talk about some of the players, because I believe on the day of the expansion draft, you guys traded up in the MLS Super Draft as well. So not only did you have the #1 pick, which you had won in that coin toss against Nashville, the other expansion side, but you'd also traded into the #3. So you had 2 of the top 3 picks. You took Robbie Robinson, you took Dylan Nealis, and then you traded away the rest of the picks in your draft. And I'm curious, what did you see about those 2 guys specifically that made them attractive to you? And what have you learned about them since you initially drafted them?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time, right? When you start building teams, you start with a blank slate, and you have to look at your full roster and how you build it. And every build is completely different based on the tools you have available to you. And one of the things, as I was looking at the supplemental roster, I really wanted to try to capture a couple of the top college players. And I thought that with the talent that was in the college, ranks, we thought picking one was great. I wanted to move into the top, pick and get number 3, which we were able to work out with Cincinnati. I tried to actually move in and get one more pick in the top 10, just because I thought a few of the college players could really come in and have an impact. And I think, in my time with Orlando, with Kyle Larin and Gressel and Miles Robinson in Atlanta, these guys can come in and play. And we spent a lot of time, I flew around, Kurt, Nicky, we spent a lot of time flying around and looking at these guys. And I had really fixated in on Robbie from the first time I saw him. I thought he was the best talent in the draft. I think he has a lot of growing to do, but from a pure soccer talent standpoint, Robbie is special. I thought Dylan was the most pro-ready guy in the draft. And playing the position of right back is an enormous need. That if you can get someone on your supplemental roster and a senior player that can come in and contribute solid minutes as a right back, then I think we've done well with those two guys. I'm super impressed with them. Dylan coming out of Georgetown, he was a captain. To get through Georgetown and play and be as competitive as they've been, and to be a captain at that team and do the education of Georgetown, he has all the right character pieces. He's a tough kid. He comes from a pro soccer family. That was really, really big for us. Robbie was interesting, because Robbie's a quiet kid, and Robbie is just he's just a soccer junkie, and Robbie just wants to go and he wants to train all the time. And I was tough with Robbie in the interview process, and I let Kurt and Nicky kind of be good guys and talk to him, and then I came in pretty heavy with Robbie, because I think Robbie has an enormous amount of talent, but Robbie doesn't spend enough time in the gym and doing the things that he's going to need to do to have a productive career. And I challenged Robbie, and he's pretty quiet. He sits there and he doesn't say too much. And I told Robbie, I said, look, I don't know if you'll start for us. And Robbie said to me, he goes, why are you going to draft me? And I thought it was a good response, right? He believes in himself. I mean, that's the one thing with Robbie. And when you watch him, he has an enormous amount of talent. And I hope he learns, that the gym is an important place for him, and I think he can have a really good career.
And that's one thing I love about you, Paul, and I've seen it at both teams you were with previous, is helping players transition, because college is very different to pro. So it's great that you can push Robbie Robinson with this team, and he's been producing these first 2 matches. But I want to put you on the hot seat a little bit. Now, Inter Miami has been linked to big names. Obviously, you started the season off on the road, 2 away games. And now talks in the media have been linked to James Rodriguez from Real Madrid. Is there any truth behind this, or can you give us any insight to any other players that you may be signing in the future?
Well, I mean, I've been very upfront and honest with, I still have an intention, or my hope before the pandemic was to sign 2 more significant players to the team, one being a DP and one being a Max Tam guy. We get linked with a lot of players. I've been very honest with saying, a lot of players want to come here, which is great. But I think, it's more than just getting big name players. They have to want to come here for the right reason. I always, when I am with clubs, I always think not about 1 year, but I think about 3 or 4 years. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to hamstring the club with a world-class player now, and we may not appreciate his contract in 3 or 4 years. I like the model of what we did in Atlanta United, but it doesn't say that I wouldn't go get a senior designated player that's a global star, but the economics need to make sense. Their motivations have to be right. They have to come here and have to be a leader. So it all goes. But listen, we hear from so many players, but in all honesty, a lot of things break down because the valuation, we can't be the highest pay that those players can get anywhere in the world. They have to come here for the right reasons.
Paul, I love that you brought up Atlanta there, because big difference in terms of star players at Orlando and Atlanta United. And obviously, you know, Kaká in Orlando is sort of a no-brainer. Maybe the Brazilian ownership helps there a bit. But you look at the Atlanta guys, the South Americans specifically, Josef Martinez, Almiron, those guys turned out to be tremendous success stories and were sort of little known. Like, I was very familiar with Josef because I was covering Serie A at the time, but no one could have, at least none of us, could have seen him becoming the superstar that he became once he joined Major League Soccer. And I'm curious, what's the pitch to these South American players that they can come into Major League Soccer and that the league has sort of grown its reputation? What's the pitch to bring guys like Pellegrini and Carranza, young guys who are playing for storied Argentine clubs, and to convince him to come to Inter Miami as you've done?
Yeah, I think. Listen, I think the success of what's happened in Atlanta United has certainly helped, right? You know, when I tell a player, when I go to Argentina or South America, and I tell a player, look, I want to bring you to Miami and I want to move you when the time is right, that you want to go play in Europe. You know, I have history on my side, right? Because that was the plan with Miguel that we did, right? Every player has different motivations. Josef's was, you know, he wasn't having a good experience in Italy. He wanted something new. I wish I could tell you that we knew Josef was going to be as dominant as he was. We didn't. We knew Josef was a really good player, but to be as dominant as he was, no one in their right mind could have thought that. We thought Miguel was special. We knew Miguel was going to be a couple of years and go. You know, so I think history now starts to show that if players have a doubt, I can say, no, look, you know, you can call Miguel Almiron, you could call Tata Martino. They'll tell you that if I tell you I'm going to move you when the time is right, then I'll move you. And I think players want that intermediate step to come here, adapt outside of Argentina or other places in South America, but mainly Argentina, and then have the opportunity to jump to Europe.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and Dre today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait for the fans to hear all your incredible responses. But do not go anywhere, because when we come back, Robbie Robinson will be joining us, our first ever Inter Miami player to be featured on OnSide.
It was about probably a week before the game. It was after we played the Tampa Bay Rowdies. The next practice I was in the starting group, and I really wanted to earn my spot within that group of 11 and really hold a place there.
Welcome back. Now, our next guest was selected first overall in the 2020 MLS Super Draft, and when injuries struck, it was this man that stepped up in the first and second game of the season. Now, Dre, you spoke extremely highly of him in the first episode, so we have some plays here of why he was just that good in the first two matches. So, Dre, walk us through these clips.
Yeah, the clips we're going to be looking at are from the DC United match, because we saw some promise and we saw some signs of why he was taken #1 overall in the LAFC match. But it was in that second game against DC United where Robbie, we talked about this last week, really seemed to put it together. And this first play we're going to look at, here's Robbie as the furthest man forward. He's, you know, got his back to goal. He's a reference point in attack. If the ball comes to him, he's in a good position to lay it off to either side, but it doesn't actually fall to him. Instead, it goes to Pizarro here. And watch this run that Robbie makes, because with this run, it's a deep penetrative run. He's going to drag both the center backs with him. That's going to create a ton of space for Pizarro to exploit with either his dribbling or his passing. He's going to dribble into that space, actually going to lay it off here for Lewis Morgan. Robbie accompanies the play, and it's that act of dragging those defenders with him that creates the good shooting opportunity for Pizarro. In fact, Robbie gets a shot off of his own, though it goes off target.
Yeah, and that's incredible to see from a player. The transition to come from college into pro is not easy to do, and he is proving otherwise. So let's jump into clip 2, Dre.
Right, so in this second play, Robbie is switched on defensively. He's going to position himself where he can jump into the passing lane of the man that he's marking, but he also has his body shape in such a way that he can take advantage of a slack pass here and start the counterattack for Inter Miami. It is a bad pass, but he's in position to take advantage of it, and it's going to be Robbie himself who begins this counterattack. Once the attack is underway, it's a 3v3, 3 defenders, 3 attacking players, but Robbie's going to eliminate one of them by taking him on with his dribble. Now it's a 3v2, and Inter Miami have space to create. They create the first goal in the club's competitive history. Rodolfo Pizarro gets the credit, but it is Robbie who does a lot to actually create that first goal in club history.
Yeah, and the vision of and awareness of a 21-year-old in Robinson is absolutely phenomenal. Now we have one last clip, so take us through this one, Dre.
So in this third and final play, another example of just good decision making by Robbie. And again, he's the point of attack back to goal. He's going to knock this one down for Morgan, and then he'll accompany the play. United have men back in defense this time, so they're well placed if Robbie tries to run in behind them. Instead, he's going to stay in between the lines, accompanying the play, keeping that defender that's in front of him engaged while knowing that Pizarro's behind him. Once he makes the dummy, that's when he accelerates into the area. It only leads to a half a chance for Inter Miami, but it's another example of good decision making becoming a goal scoring opportunity for the club. But you could just see how he shows that maturity of when to make the run, when not to, when to get rid of the ball, little feints to draw the defenders in, to keep them engaged. I think there is so much promise to this kid's game and so much maturity that's well beyond his years.
I love that you said maturity in his play, because he's definitely showing that in the first 2 matches. Now, let's jump into his heat map a little bit. I want you to walk me through this, of just the ground that this 21-year-old is covering.
Yeah, this is interesting, Kaylin, because take into account, this is your starting center forward, right? And yes, at times he is that target center forward, that reference point in attack with his back to goal, waiting for the ball to come in so he can sort of lay it off for other players. But you can see he's getting touches in midfield. He's getting touches on the right wing. There's this interchangeability between himself, Pizarro, and Lewis Morgan that I think makes the attack much more dynamic.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. It almost reminds me of how Karim Benzema plays for Real Madrid. He's that target number 9, but has been popping into the midfield, so it's exciting to see from such a young player. But let's invite him on our show finally. We've been speaking about him in episode 1. We've been speaking about him in episode 2. So welcome, Robbie Robinson.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a great pleasure to be the first Inter Miami player to be featured on the show. And yeah, I'm ready to get into the questions. What do you have for me?
It's honestly such a pleasure to have you on the show, our first ever Inter Miami player, and we're going to put you in the hot seat. We have some burning questions for you from Dre.
Yeah, Robbie, thanks for taking the time. We saw in game 1 against LAFC your promise, we saw your talent, we saw why you were taken number 1 overall, but it was in that second game against DC United that I think you put things together. Maybe it was a comfort factor, but I'm wondering what was it that was going through your head between game number 1 and game number 2 that resulted in just being such a threat against DC?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with, taking my experiences from the game that we had in LA and transferring those over to the game in DC. It felt like the game slowed down a lot for me in the DC game, and yeah, it just felt a lot more fluid, and I think we just all played together as a team, and that's also what made it better, is we got that chemistry a little better from last game, and yeah, we were able to do something, so it looked very promising for us.
Also, Robbie, we've now heard off the air here from Victor Ulloa, from Will Trapp, and from Paul McDonald. All of them said that you're a very quiet guy, that you don't speak a lot in the locker room or when you get on the pitch, you transform. Now, we've seen that transformation version, but I'm wondering, what is that like? What happens when you step on the pitch that changes your character so much?
Yeah, I think it has to do with what my dad really used to tell me a lot when I was younger. It's when you come into a new place, try to learn as much as possible at first. So that's kind of sitting back a little bit and, just watching everything and, trying to learn from everything. And I think that's the best way to go about when you get into a new team, especially when you're a rookie young player. I think it's better for you to come in and be low key and just work hard. And, that's what I've been trying to do. And, when I get on the field, I can be creative and, play my game. And yeah, that's when I have the most fun.
Now, I promised the heartbeat of the club, and that is exactly what they are. I said it last week that we have the most incredible fans in the MLS. So what better way to connect the passion behind the badge than have some open questions with our fans?
El partido está para nosotros, el juego es para nosotros, Santiago. Díselo, Víctor. ¿Está claro? Tenemos que ser muy inteligentes, tenemos que entender el juego, jugar con el corazón y jugar con unas patas enormes para tener confianza para ir para adelante. ¿Está claro? Si tenemos ese corazón todo el tiempo, tenemos las patas para poder jugar y entendemos el juego, está claro, vamos con los 3 puntos. ¿Está claro, gente? ¿Está claro? Vamos a hacer historia, ¿está claro?
Now, I promised the heartbeat of the club, and that is exactly what they are. I said it last week that we have the most incredible fans in the MLS. So what better way to connect the passion behind the badge than have some open questions with our fans?
Hey, Max here in Miami, part of the Sea Supporters Club. I wanted to know and ask, how will a shortened season schedule affect training routines and game preparation for the staff and for the players as well?
Well, thanks, Max. That's a good question, and really only one of us two has been a professional footballer, and it's not me, so Kaylin, why don't you take it?
Dre, you play your 6-a-side games every week. Come on now. Yeah, obviously it's not ideal for anyone, but these players are professional. The club is professional. They're going to have the right structures implemented from the training staff, the proper nutrition, the proper recovery, because obviously playing in America, travel is the biggest thing. You're going coast to coast. But at the end of the day, they're playing for one of the best clubs in the MLS, and they're going to have the proper protocols and the proper procedures to make sure that these athletes and these players are ready for games week in and week out. And thank you always, Dre. You're always so much fun to have on these shows. We've conquered episode 2. How was it for you today?
Yeah, we're still doing it. Actually, I love today's show. Paul McDonald was with us, Robbie Robinson. We went a deep dive into the #1 pick. I can't wait to get to the next one.
Yeah, now I want to remind all of our fans that you can be part of the show. Simply send in your questions via email, text, WhatsApp audio, or a video to join the discussion weekly. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you guys all next week.